think the uproar about the PADAF and the DAP today is a reflection of that, is that the PADAF basically is an attempt to decentralize decision-making processes. But on the other hand, all it's done is to encourage the dissemination and the dispersion of corruption. And so that's what's going on. So that's the history. So corruption isn't something that just happened yesterday. It's something that's been happening for a very, very long time, and it's so tightly woven into the Philippine political system that it's kind of hard to imagine how we can get rid of it.
Okay.
Kasi sa palagay ko dito sa Philippines kasi masyadong talamak yung corruption. So unlike sa other countries kasi organized yung ginagawa nila. Dito kasi may tinatawag na parang palakasan. So kapag nasa mataas ka na kanungkulan, parang hindi na masisilip ng mga nasa baba mo yun kasi nga andun ka na sa mataas. So tingin ko yun lang ang problema. Kung yung mga lawmakers, sila din yung mga law breakers. Kaya parang ganun. Yun lang. Thank you.
Yung mga politiko natin, lahat sila nagmamalinis pero hindi na alam yung nasagasaan tayong mahihirap, di ba? Yung mahirap yung tulad namin naghanap buhay. Pag hindi kumita isang araw, di patay gutom, wala na. Wala na pasayin, di ba? Yun lang po, masabi ko. Salamat po.
Ako masasabi ko about sa graft sa Pilipinas, bababa pa lang posisyon, corrupt na. SK pa lang, corrupt na yan. What more kung medyo tumaas yung posisyon niya? Mas lalong corrupt sa Pilipinas.
About the corruption here in the Philippines, well, as we can see, even before pa naman Spanish era, nandun na yung corruption. So, what happened is parang na-adapt na natin yung corruption na yon hanggang ngayon, pero parang mas lumala. Parang as we can see before, it's okay kasi, not really okay, kasi yung Spaniards talaga yung nagturo sa atin, but now even mga Filipinos or talagang mga Filipinos or yung mga nasa politics pa, yung talagang or kapwa nating mga Filipino yung gumagawa ng certain things na hindi naman dapat gawin sa kapwa nilang mga Filipinos. So really X for the corruption. That's it.
Kinakailangan ng isang presidente ay ang magiging tapat sa panunukulan at magiging huwarang sa ibang tao. Ang isang pangurakot ay hindi maganda. So nagsisimula ito sa sarili.
Spanish colonial period, because one of the things the Spaniards did to raise money for the crown was they sold offices, right? So you became a governor because you could pay the highest price, and they would bid prices and so forth. So there was already that long tradition of buying offices. And then when the Americans came to colonize the Philippines, what they did was they tended to favor certain kinds of people that they thought would be useful for their purposes, and so they served as patrons to these clients. And the biggest clients of the Americans were people like Manuel Quezon and Sergio Osmeña and all these people, and so they would favor them, and then the clients were expected to deliver, and they in turn would have their own clients that they would then ply with money and with favors and so forth, so that they could deliver. So the whole structure of patron-client relationship served as a basis for corruption during that period. Then after the war, you still had the same system, where in order to get elected, see, this is what happened. After the war, something very, very interesting changed, which is the way people voted. Before the war, not everyone could vote. Before the war, there was what you called restricted suffrage. So only people with a certain income and who could speak Spanish or English fluently could vote. And women could not vote. They were eventually given the vote in 1937. But after the war, they passed what you called universal suffrage. So everybody could vote. Even the poorest of the poor could vote. And so that presented a problem to the politicians, especially the elite or the rich politicians, which is, how are you going to control these votes? Well, the thing to do is to buy them and to either use fair or foul means. You could either buy the votes, or you could intimidate voters into voting for you, which of course is also a form of corruption, right? So the change in the electoral system and the extension of universal suffrage actually had the effect of intensifying corruption, right? So very ironic, in an attempt to democratize society, they created more corruption and therefore less democracy, not more democracy, right? And this continued.
There were some major scandals. Some of them were really very flimsy compared to the type of stealing that some of the government officials are doing now. During the campaign, he was running against Magsaysay. They claimed that he bought a golden Orinola. They also raised the issue of his brother taking advantage of his position in acquiring some properties through influence peddling. And it was also during this time when they charged him with dispensing import quotas, no, to businessmen, which allows them to bring imported goods. During this time, importation was restricted. So what some of the people close to the president did was to personally solicit licenses, which they in turn sell to businessmen for a profit.
Ramon Magsaysay dismissed corrupt and unskilled officers in the army, was staunchly against corruption, and charged the Quirino government of corruption and incompetence. Though there were issues that corruption was rampant among the government officials and that they even tried to bribe the president, however it is known that he resisted.
Magsaysay won, no? And then his vice president succeeded him, Garcia. So Garcia ran against Macapagal, the father of GMA. During the campaign, it was brought out that this American businessman, Harry Stonehill, who came here as a GI, officer, and considering that it was such a situation that he could really take advantage of, considering his experience as an American, so he was able to put up several businesses. In fact, he is considered to be the one who pioneered cigarette manufacturing in the country. And apparently, to corner most of these major business deals, he had what they term as a blue book. And it turned out that most of the high-ranking officials from Malacanang all the way down to the Senate were receiving grease money from Harry Stonehill. So eventually he was deported, and most of his business enterprises eventually were left behind, and he had some of his lawyers running it up to this time.
And then Marcos, of course, came to power. And when Marcos came to power, one of the things he did was to centralize corruption. It used to be all officials engaged in some form of corruption one way or the other, and they all got their cuts. But with Marcos, what he did was he centralized the practice of corruption, so everybody had to pay in order to do any kind of business to Marcos. Marcos got his cut everywhere, right? So instead of paying several people, you just ended up paying one person, and that was Marcos, right? Or even if you paid somebody below him, that person still had to pay off Marcos. So that was the big difference. And that's why Marcos became the most corrupt, because he exercised enormous power to extract all this money from different people. Plus the fact that Marcos was able to get money from international aid agencies like IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and so forth and so on. The United States, of course, which gave him a lot of aid. So he used all that money and stashed it for his own family and for his own private use.
Despite the common belief that the Aquino administration was a completely clean one, a number of scandals regarding corruption exploded during her presidency. A large scandal Aquino was involved in was the buzz surrounding agrarian reform and how it positively benefited her family, the Coancos, with regards to the land reclamation of Hacienda Luisita in Tarlac.
Do justice to every man.
Do justice to every man.
And consecrate myself.
And consecrate myself.
To the service of the nation.
To the service of the nation.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Well, of course, I was in the Senate 1987 to 1998 during the Cory and Ramos administrations. And with the restoration of democracy, of course, we were really happy that the Congress was opened, because Marcos closed the Congress. He padlocked the Congress. So I guess there was a sense when we were in the Senate that we had to be good, or we had to behave well, because that was after, martial law, after 20 to 22 years, no? And so it was really Cory who created the Countrywide Development Fund. That was a big responsibility for her. She was responsible for allowing us, the senators, to be able to decide on what projects we wanted, what you would call discretionary funds for the senators, okay? But at that time, there were controls. You had to, I remember having to write receipts for gasoline, for NGOs, did we know them well? In other words, it wasn't the kind of free-for-all, the Napoles going to whatever NGO was there. And so every step of the way, there were controls.
And then when Marcos was overthrown in 1986 during EDSA, Cory Aquino came into power. One of the things that happened during Cory Aquino's power was that there was a restoration of the old order. The same old elites came back, and with the same old elites, the same old practice of corruption was reintroduced. And so once again, you went from centralized corruption to decentralized corruption. And that's been happening ever since, and that's still the practice today.
The first half of Ramos's 6-year term as president was characterized by rapid economic growth and political stability in the country, despite facing communist insurgencies and an Islamic separatist movement in Mindanao. On 1997, however, the Asian financial crisis slowed the economic growth of the country. Like many presidents before him, Ramos was also accused of corruption. The PEA-Amari Manila Bay reclamation deal, the conversion of the military base in Fort Bonifacio for private development, the Centennial Expo project, and the Ben Press North Luzon Expressway have been tainted with allegations of corruption.
They claimed that what he did, he claimed that he did not steal any money. And to defend some of the charges, he claims that most of these really were legitimate commission, because apparently it was charged that he personally arranged the sale of some of these big companies like the Philippine Long Distance Company, the big property in Tagaytay Islands, and he also with some Chinese partners claimed that he listed in the stock market and manipulated the value of a company called BW. And added to that, of course, is several major incidents like the Weteng Gate. One of his close associates before, Sing Son, claimed that he was the bagman who had been collecting proceeds from wetting all over the country, and this is in a multi-million peso account, no? So this actually triggered off the second EDSA revolution due to all of these scandals that were raised against him. He was thrown out of the presidency.
Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo, and she has been charged with election fraud. If found guilty, she is facing life behind bars. Are you singling her out?
No, we're not singling her out, but she was at the head of misgovernance, and as chief executive and chief executor of our laws, all of the transgressions should have been under her purview, and she should have done something about it. We have already cases pending, even against my predecessor. My predecessor actually is in jail, undergoing trial for electoral sabotage, and there are other cases that are in the works. So we're preparing all the necessary evidence and going through all of the procedures. We're trying to expedite the cases so that there is certainty that there's conviction and jail time for people who have violated and transgressed our laws.
Since election, Aquino has since promised for an anti-corruption administration. Despite this, in August 2013, outrage over the commonly known pork barrel scandal, or the Priority Development Assistance Fund, PDAF, which was a system that had been stopped by Ferdinand Marcos during his administration, but has then been brought back in 1986 during Corazon Aquino's administration. The recent PDAF scam, which involved Janet Lamnapoles and other numerous senators and representatives, reported to be plundering over 10 billion pesos and has since led to a widespread call for the abolition of the PDAF system. Outrage over the pork barrel scam has also led to the 1 Million People March on August 26, 2013, in which many Filipinos participated and called for the end of the pork barrel.